6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, the numbers start adding up, saying that they did not want local funding for more affordable housing. But as they began to speak, it became evidently very clear these weren't like real people. Well, they may or may not have been real people, but they didn't actually have any sense of having listened to the issue. They were reading from a script. It was clear it was a script. The same points kept coming up in the same order with the same language that wasn't natural language, right? And it was full of misinformation. It was incorrect. That was what I had written things I wanted to say, right? And as I'm hearing all these things unfold, I'm on my phone pivoting and I'm changing what I'm going to say when it's my turn, you know. And I got up there and I said, like, whoever wrote this could have done a much better job because it's all false. Whoever's feeding these people needs to get their facts straight, you know. But what really struck me, and in the context of James, what really struck me was that I'm sitting there and I'm trying to be honest with myself. I'm trying to continue to listen. I'm trying to always let myself be disrupted. And so you do have to sit there and you do have to think, is this honest opinion? Is this something we've overlooked? Is it something we could be wrong about? But then it became clear to me the difference between 70 plus people who came out in the purple shirts and spoke on, you know, as Hope Network members. And then these people who called in online and are calling for the county to remove this from the budget. The difference became clear to me. And one of the main differences is that in Hope, we have sat in listening meetings, hundreds of listening meetings. We have heard story after story of folks who actually struggle. We have spent time with the people affected. We have platformed those who need and have lived in affordable housing. We have listened and done the work of surrounding ourselves with those who have worked to think through the economy of housing. We have partnered with the Schimberg Institute, a nonpartisan group who did research and let us know how many units it would take to solve the problem. We have looked at other communities and the efforts they have implemented that have either been successful or have failed. We have listened. And of course, then, based on our listening, if there is a problem with our neighbors, and we are told to love our neighbor as ourselves, then we speak. But we are not quick to speak. We have listened for years and years. But then there's the other side, being quick to speak, what Proverbs would call being foolish, right? Foolish people who fell into the trap laid out before them of just speaking something that was put in their hands without listening first, without any sense of justice or righteousness at play in a scenario. The call from James is like, listen up, people of God. You don't want to become foolish because you've just spoken something that hasn't been based on listening. That's the point drives home again in our text for today. He says, hey, you might think you want to be a teacher. You might think you have something to say to the community. He's like, but be careful with that because remember, the more you speak in public, the more you're going to be judged publicly, right? That's part of the game there. And he says the judgments are harsher against teachers. And then he makes this really interesting point that's so basic, so simple, and yet we don't always embrace it for ourselves. James says, we all make mistakes, right? We all make mistakes. And that's true, isn't it? Every single one of us in here has at one time or another said something that later we're like, oops, that was way off base. I was just completely wrong about that. Or maybe a moral mistake, like I shouldn't have lashed out at that person in that way. I shouldn't have tried to tear them down with my language in that way. It's the most obvious thing in the world that we all make verbal mistakes, speech mistakes, right? But then we get to this discussion of speech, and James makes this really interesting logical movement. He says, if there's a person who didn't make a mistake in speaking, that person would be complete. They'd be whole. They'd be like a unified body, right? Why does James say this, and what's the point he's trying to make? He goes on, that if a person could be mistake-free in speaking, that would mean they'd be perfect in every way. Because it is speech, it is the imperfections in our speech that reveal a general kind of imperfection about ourselves. And I just think that's one of the most perceptive things that a person could come up with. James was figuring things out that Freud had to take another 2,000 years to discover. James puts a lot of weight on his speech, doesn't he? In fact, he puts all the weight in the world on speech. He says the tongue is the smallest part of the body, but it can do these seemingly infinitely creative acts or destructive acts. He says, how can something so small bring life or bring death? How can something so small have so much power? And he searches for a metaphor. It's a rudder on a ship, something small that steers the whole thing. Or, maybe with microbial sciences, James could be like, it's like a virus. One little thing could destroy a whole body or something. James talks about speech in a way that draws us back to the whole narrative of the scripture that he builds his points on. The world is created through word and action of speech, right? The word of the Lord is that which comes into the community and forms it and shapes it and disrupts it, guides it. Everything that our world is like capital W, right? I won't go so far to say that we've created the earth with our language, although Tyler and I have had discussions like that. But I will go so far to say that everything we know our world to be, we have created with our words. Our culture, our religions. It is the most powerful part of our body. Now this fits really clearly within James's larger movement of the letter, right? We can see how this connects. A community very much depends on not using speech for evil. We've seen it in our own community. You can quickly start to tear things apart with language. We can see how bad teaching could lead to a dead faith with no works. We can imagine a scenario where a flattering tongue praises the wealthy to secure their power, right? We understand why James would spend so much time on the tongue after everything he spent time on thus far. But there's one specific idea that really stands out. And that's the idea that the tongue is inherently divided, right? James says our speech is divided. It can curse human beings, and it can bless God who created human beings. James says that the world can set on fire the cycle of nature. What? That's the NRSV. The CEB that you heard read says the circle of life, which I like better because it makes us think of the Lion King, right? It's a circle of life, and the zebras, and they're eating the grass, and the lions are eating the zebras, and the tongue can just come in and decimate the whole thing. Human language can just disrupt that whole beautiful cycle, James says. What? The tongue is fire, and that fire is animated by the fires of hell. Man, James is just writing metal lyrics here. But it points to something important. There is something unnatural about our speech. There's something that doesn't fit. No other animal uses language in the way we do as far as world building and inhabiting symbolic structures, right? Having culture. We seem to be unique on our planet in the way our tongues work, our speech works. And here's what's really great about all of that. For all of that negative language and warning that James says, he does say we have the possibility of channeling it, of controlling it. You could read a lot of that chapter and be like, well, we are just doomed then, right? James says the tongue burns everything down, it stains the rest of our body. And we might think the solution then is don't ever talk or cut your tongue out, right? If that's really the problem, just get rid of the problem. But James doesn't indicate anything like that, right? The problem isn't to avoid this thing that can cause all this trouble. He says, no, just take it and guide it. You can find control. How? He says, well, we manage our internal lives in such a way that duplicity, deceit, hypocrisy, if they are not within our hearts, then they will not inform our speech. He ends that point, he drives that home by saying, a fig tree can't produce olives. It's not in its gene code, right? This is the same thing we hear from Jesus. From the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. James uses the idea of a spring. That which is within us will come out. That's helpful then, because we can listen to our speech, and when it is divided, we can see where we have been divided. We can work backwards. That was the Freudian insight. The things we say really do matter. They really do point to something. It is this recognition for James, then, that allows space to change course, to pivot. Once you see it, once you hear it, you know it's there and you can move within it. We see this example in Peter in our second text. Peter can say one thing that sounds really good, but there's a sense of division within him, right? He says, Jesus is the Messiah. Jesus, I think you're the Messiah. And Jesus says, great, that's good, you're actually correct. Don't tell anybody. Why would Jesus say, you're right, don't tell anybody? Because he's perceiving in Peter, right, that though Peter is speaking the truth, he's speaking the truth in order to cover something up. He's speaking the truth in order to lie. This is the crazy thing that humans can do. This is the power of speech and the tongue. We can tell the truth to lie. He says, as Jesus says, you're right, I am the Messiah, don't tell anybody. And here's what being Messiah means. I'm going to suffer. I'm going to be killed. Peter attempts to exorcise Jesus. The same word rebuke is the same word that they've been doing to the demons. And he says, Jesus, don't you talk like that. In the name of you, stop talking like that. And Jesus says, get behind me, Satan. They're like exorcising each other, right? Why would he call Peter Satan in this moment? Because Peter's chasing this idea that the Messiah is somehow unable to suffer. That Messiah is victorious and untouched and has all this power. But Jesus has heard that before, hasn't he? Where did he first hear that offer, that Messiah is one who God lifts up and saves from death? In the wilderness with Satan. That was his whole temptation. And he's hearing it again now in the words, in the tongue of Peter. But Peter, I don't think, is an evil person. He probably just loves Jesus. He doesn't want to see Jesus suffer. He's probably just repeating lines he's heard from his mother and his father and their mother and their father, that Messiah is going to come and, be a Davidic king and take the sword and all that. He's not like a bad person. But his words are still satanic. And this is the amazing thing about the human speech and the human tongue. We can be well-meaning, we can be well-intentioned in our own minds, we can be trying to even protect those we love or think we are, but we could be undoing a whole system of good and justice and right. That's a big, big deal, right? Trying to stop Jesus' path on earth. But we do this in all kinds of other small ways too. We speak in certain ways to avoid other things. And unfortunately, most of the time, what it is we're trying to avoid leads us to a worse place than we are now. We see this in our world in bigger structures, the way that law and order can be a signifier for anti-black policy, or the way that lower taxes can be a cover for rising corporate oligarchy or neglecting senior adults, or the way that family values can be a cover for homophobia. The problem is that those words are right and good. None of us want chaos. All of us want law. Nobody wants burdensome taxes, me least of all. And nobody wants to see the destruction of those we love. We all want our families to thrive. And so it is easy for those who want to advance their own interests or the interest of those who get them elected to play to those concerns with those words. But they're telling truths to lie. Peter says Jesus is the Messiah, but for Peter, that was a lie. Jesus has to confront Peter with the truth, and the truth is that the world is the kind of place where messiahs suffer. There's actually this really beautiful antagonism in the Old Testament. Proverbs 1 is this call to wisdom, and wisdom cries out and says, "Blessed are those who follow wisdom. They will not come to ruin." But then in Isaiah 50, we hear the words of the servant of the Lord cry out, "I have the words of wisdom in my mouth." And And then as you read the rest of the chapter, you hear all of the blessings, because Proverbs 1 says that if you have wisdom, you have blessing. No, Isaiah 50 actually goes like this. I have the words of wisdom in my mouth. I turned my back to those who struck me, my cheeks to those who pulled out my beard. I did not hide my face from insult and spitting, says the suffering servant. Jesus points to Peter. Look, Peter, it would be nice if having the words of wisdom, of preaching the kingdom of God, led us to this place of just peace and safety and security, but that's not the truth of it. The truth of it is we face antagonism. We walk right into it, and wisdom leads us into that conflict. If you are willing to lose your life, you will find it. But Peter can't see that at first, and it's precisely because he not only has a different imagined world in which he's operating, but because the language he uses serves to obscure that fact from himself. And that's the key. He and we can use our own language as our barriers to our own realization. He's able to look at himself and think he's helping Jesus, and he's actually doing the opposite. And we do this all the time. That can feel pretty hopeless, right? Who can tame the tongue? I guess we're just stuck in a cycle of lying to ourselves or telling truths to ourselves that end up being lies, right? But what is it that breaks Peter out of the cycle? Jesus slices through it. We can imagine ourselves, right, seeking the best thing, thinking we're doing the right thing, but walking down the wrong path. History is full of people like that, right? And what breaks us out of illusory goods or fantasies we have about our world that we might not even want to achieve, even if they were given to us, what breaks us out is our ability to listen to each other and to point out when we're doing that. We cannot do it by ourselves. You cannot have any kind of growth, spiritual movement. You cannot have any transformation by yourself. It is impossible. That is just a lie that sells more books, right? We have to have each other, because it is only in those interventions like Jesus has with Peter, where he points out what's happening in Peter's language, that we will ever find any movement for ourselves. But when we do, it's beautiful. Peter, of course, ends up following exactly what Jesus says, takes up his own cross, literally, is crucified just as Jesus was. Where are we employing language to keep ourselves safe when really we need to be willing to lose our lives? Where is it that we cannot recognize something in ourselves and have to learn to listen again and again and again to our own speech? These are the questions that stand before us. So our call then is to continue listening. Listen, listen, listen to those who are in need. Listen to the cries of people living real lives of struggle. Do not isolate yourself from the cries of the people in your community. Second, listen, listen, listen to what's happening in you. Embrace about yourself what James recognized, that we are capable of speaking both good and bad. The solution is not to get rid of the bad, but to work to control and guide towards the good. For today, the call then is to examine your speaking. Listen to others, listen to yourself. What is going on in your speech? Does it appear well-meaning but works to deny what's happening within you? Works to deny the things that you know are hard about your life that you don't want to think about right now? Don't let your speech draw you away from the promise of Jesus' good news of finding life through struggle, of finding life after struggle. We follow Christ's pattern, we hear the lesson of James, and we move towards our antagonisms, because it is always that Christ finds us there. It is always there, on the cross, where we see the life of God most vividly displayed. And it is only moving through the cross that we see resurrection. It is only from admitting this wild capability of our speech and our hearts that we can guide them to something productive for our world. So may we embrace and move through contradiction and antagonism in ourselves and through our speech. And may our actions that result produce and create good life. May we have the courage to embrace life for ourselves wherever we find it. May we discover the upside-down truth of the good news. And may our speech create and inhabit worlds of justice, love, mercy, and peace. Let's pray. God, we ask that you give us ears to hear what we are saying to ourselves and about ourselves, ears to hear what we are saying about our lives to others. We thank you so deeply. We have so much gratitude for the chance to have moments like the listening meeting, where we're able to take a few minutes and say, what is it that's keeping you up at night? What is it that's concerning you? We don't always get that chance. It has been stolen from us in many ways. And so we come with serious, thankful hearts for those small opportunities. May we be faithful to those opportunities. May we continue to foster them in our community. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. On the night that Jesus was to be handed over to the authorities, tried for blasphemy of all things, and then executed for sedition by the Roman Empire. What a night. And that night began, of course, with a meal, as probably all of Jesus' events did, because the connection to community was what drove him. The kingdom of God is among us, among you all, he says. And so one last time they celebrated the arrival of that kingdom, and they shared a meal of bread that he broke and blessed and passed out with gratitude. And they shared wine with that bread that he poured out and blessed and gave thanks for. And he said that this bread, this wine that we use to celebrate deliverance and joy and life, he said, this is my body and my blood, which are broken. Not good dinner conversation. In fact, his disciples once again spoke up, no, Lord, no, we don't want that to be the case. And once again, he reminded them, it is that willingness to embrace one's suffering for the good of one's community where life is found. Not just life in a general sense. Jesus says, my act is for the remission of your sins. Your sins are removed. How can that be? Jesus fundamentally shifted the course of the world, altered it, gave us a new path to walk so that we do not have to choose sin. The things that divide us, the things that tear us apart, the things that destroy our well-being and our joy, the way we miss the mark in so many ways. This is why he said, as often as you eat this meal from now on, do it in remembrance of me, so that the gift of that freedom may be available to you again and again, confirmed to you again and again, reminding you again and again of your path to walk. So may you find life, may you find grace. May you become the body and blood of Christ for your neighbors and your community as we partake together today. current of your love is flowing to us. We don't want anything to get in the way of it. Not anything outside of us or anything inside our own hearts. We are beginning to understand that evil is whatever impedes love. So help us, God, and don't let us get caught in the trap of trading connective rituals for those that isolate us, of trading life-giving rituals for those that drain our joy, and ignoring the state of our hearts. We know we must be transformed from the inside out, that we must do inner work to become aligned with love, disconnecting from judgment, releasing resentment, clearing hostility, relinquishing pride, cultivating compassion, creating peace. And we know that we must allow love to work on us, restoring us to our truest nature. God children, love-centered, heart-open, Christ-conscious, creative beings, reflecting your rightly ordered world in our communities. Let our hearts like beacons point the way to yours, shining love's illumination. Amen. Take and eat.